Welcome to your introduction to business architecture. It's great having you with me, and this one is really just a brief overview of what business architecture is before we deep dive into the various different components of your course. So what I want you to take away with you is just to understand fundamentally, what is business architecture? You don't have to know all of the information from the beginning, but just an understanding of what is the role of a business architect and what are the kind of key things that we do in business architecture and how does it all work together. So best of luck with your first module that we'll be dealing with, and let's get going. I found this quote and I thought it was so appropriate. So even though this is for building architecture, the quote really does apply to business architecture. So architecture is not an inspirational business. It is a rational procedure to do sensible and hopefully beautiful things. That's all. So I love watching the Reno shows and seeing how people can make really old ugly homes look great again, and there's some principles to consider here. As you can see, over time there seems to be a degrading of homes, obviously due to the elements, or that people have started to add things on and it's not quite working how it used to work. And often what happens in these renovation shows, either people are doing new builds and start from scratch, or they're looking to improve what is already there and maybe make it look better and so forth. So similarly, when we look at business architecture, we look at an organization that has been around. It doesn't only have to be an existing organization, it can be a new and small business, but let's use the example of an organization that's been around, and over time there's been additions and there's been things that have been added, and it eventually becomes this kind of disjointed perspective, and it doesn't really align with what the initial intent of the house was, or that what you need now is far different from what the house originally was intended to perform. So if you look at a business from a business architectural point of view and you link it to this idea of a reno that you're doing in a house, your business architect is going in and figuring out what the design and layout of that particular business is, just like your architect would figure out what is the current state of your house. And a business architect would then look at what are all those components and how would you bring them all together so that you have a really well-functioning operating type of structures. The business architect doesn't build the house. The business architect helps discover what that house looks like. In other words, provides that blueprint of the operation of how that house is looking, and helps with the strategy of how to change it into the future state. So just as a building architect would draw up your buildings, look at your current plans, look at what your future plans are, and come up with a blueprint of how your house might look, so too does this happen in business architecture, where the business architect works through the business and discovers what are the options that the business might want to bring in. So we looked at a house and it has a lot of different things going on while you're building. So we're going to simplify. So we're going to talk about Lego in the same terms, where if you were building a house, let's look at how we would build our Lego characters. And we're going to relate these characters and we're going to relate the building blocks to business architecture and how you would build your blueprints for your organization. And that's just a metaphor to keep it really simple. So when we have a Lego box, we know that it consists of Lego parts, and these are generally Lego blocks that you put together and you form a house or a car or some different kind of artifact. It also has characters, it also has different sizes and colors and so forth. And we will be using this metaphor when we describe business architecture just from a simplicity point of view. But you can imagine now, when you get this box, it's a kind of a blank box, and we're going to start building characters and building stories and building products against it. And we'll be doing something like that in business architecture as well. So we're looking at how do we relate some of these parts. So you've got what in the middle here is the key areas of business architecture. So you've got your 4 pillars on the outside, and those are your primary concepts that we work with. And then you've got your cross concepts, which are things like strategy, initiatives, products, stakeholders, metrics, and policies. Now, in your Lego story that we just recently spoke about, capabilities, these are really the building blocks of an organization. So just as we spoke about in our Lego box, the capabilities are these building blocks. So we want to know, what are all of these capabilities that we have in our organization? Next, we look at our value stream. So we want to know, what are we making? What is the value that the company adds or the business adds to its stakeholders and its customers? And typically you could use that as the things that we make out of it. So what's the value? So we've built a house from our Lego box, or we've built a car from the Lego box. We will then look at organization, and organization is really, how are we organized and what are the characters in our business story. So this could be both internal and external characters that we're working with. And then lastly, in our 4 pillars, we've got our information concepts, and here we'll talk about bringing the details together, piecing the names, the definitions, and those different concepts into our business architectural framework and our knowledge base. And so all of these parts that you see here are fundamentally blueprints, and you can bring these blueprints together. And this is how business architecture links the enterprise. It is how we add value as business architects to the organization. So I wanted to show you what it might look like in practice. So we've spoken about, okay, so you're building a house and you get your blueprint from your architect. Now, when we relate that and we say we've got all these building blocks, so we're busy piecing all of this stuff from a business architecture point of view, and we've got our business architecture framework. Now, this is how it might look in an actual tool. And so this is an example that I've got from fierceinsight.com, and there is a link to them that you can have a look at if you like. So we've spoken about our 4 pillars. So we've got our capabilities, we've got our value streams, we've got our information map, we've got our organization, and then we can cross map as well, and we'll talk about this in a minute, to things like applications and data and other more enterprise level architectures. So this is where business architecture really is a blueprint and a way in which to realize strategy, because you're giving the business the tools and the insight into how it might look. As mentioned, business architecture has a very close alignment with enterprise architecture, and actually business architecture is one of the core pillars of enterprise architecture. So let's define what that difference is. So business architecture is a standalone entity. You can do business architecture without IT systems or without being part of an enterprise framework. And there are multiple. Enterprise framework is just one of the multiple types of frameworks you could get. So business architecture is a standalone architecture which is really there to help bridge the business from strategy to operations. And this means that business architecture provides the tools, the vision. So just as a building architect would go and determine what the vision of the client is in terms of building their home, so would a business architect go and see what the vision is for the organization and the executive team, the strategy to help build what it might look like. And then in terms of enterprise architecture, the enterprise really does need, because remember, enterprise architecture is really looking at the bringing together of both the business and of IT components. So your IT, like for instance, your application architecture, if we don't know what the building blocks of our organization are, how would we know what applications we need? So this is a key component. If what I do as an organization has certain key building blocks, my applications should support that. So we shouldn't just be choosing applications for application's sake. We should have a direct correlation to what we want to be able to do as an organization, what we do as an organization. So as you can see that there's a good relationship between the two, but I want to highlight that business architecture can be a profession on its own. It doesn't rely on enterprise architecture, but it is an essential component of enterprise architecture and can be used within that framework. So what actually is business architecture? Because we've spoken a little bit about all of the pieces of business architecture, and it can be quite a challenging thing to understand initially because it's a little bit out of the box for a lot of people who've been working in industry for some time. But fundamentally, it's a discipline of cross-organizational design. So we've spoken about all the bits and pieces that we bring together to give one perspective of that particular business as a whole, and it's closely related to enterprise architecture. So although they are separate disciplines, they do also integrate into the enterprise architecture discipline, depending on the context of the organization that you're working within. Let's go back in time a little bit just to give you a perspective as to what the history of business architecture is. So it has its origins in the 1980s, and it was looking at cross-organizational design of the business as a whole. So you can imagine as businesses got bigger and franchising occurred and it became quite a complex structure, you wanted to get a good picture of how this all comes together. So if we go back to the analogy of building a house, you can imagine, let's assume that this house was just added to, but at some point we had to go back and say, what does this look like? It was proposed as a blueprint of the enterprise, a business strategy and representation of a business design. So this kind of the origin. So there definitely was a need when we first looked at it from an organizational point of view. So late 2000s, skipping forward, the first handbook was proposed, which required a separate framework. So when we speak about this enterprise framework and we talk about business architecture, this was to provide a framework for any organization, regardless of what type of business it was. Again, in the late 2000s, the business architecture profession was established, and in 2015, business architecture has evolved into a common practice. So you'll now see that there are job adverts that say looking for a business architect. And as mentioned, this could be specifically in the role of enterprise, and we'll go into a little bit more detail what that means, but also from a strategic perspective, from change management and so forth. So that's a brief history of what business architecture is and where it's come from. Business architecture allows everyone, from strategic planning teams all the way through to implementation teams, to get on the same page. And by the same page, we mean we can see the same picture, we all know. So in the building, if we're building a house, we want the plumbers and the engineers and the customers all to be able to see what that house is going to look like, or what it currently looks like. And this helps us address challenges and meet business objectives better. So if we look at the step that we're going through, basically business architecture works on establishing a business strategy, assessing your business impact, so doing a bit of analysis as to what is the impact of that strategy. It looks at architecting a business solution. It looks at establishing initiative plans, so what type of programs will be run out of this, and then assisting in deploying the solution. To be able to achieve this, again, we look at bridging that strategy and the actionable results using our blueprints and our core business architecture, particularly, which are our information concepts, our business capabilities, our organizational alignment, our value streams. So these core things that we build, and remember I said to you, when you look at the Lego blocks and the Lego box, we are busy constructing all of these elements together to give you a picture of what your organization looks like, and how you would be able to move and transition from what your strategic objectives are into what your operational objectives, your change objectives, and so forth might be. And because business architecture creates this long-serving view of the organization, in other words, we don't just do a project and then stop a project. Business architecture is a picture that you can revert back to and use several times, and becomes a basis of a more long-term view of the organization, which really does add value, because you're not starting again for every single project. You've already got a baseline on which to work. Now we have to bring in the formal term for business architecture, which it represents a holistic, multi-dimensional business view of capabilities, end-to-end value delivery, information and organizational structure, and the relationships among these business views and strategies, products, policies, initiatives, and stakeholders. So that's your formal description, and I hope the previous examples that I've given has helped to solidify what this formal definition is. Now, the purpose of your BIZBOK guide, which is really your business architecture body of knowledge, it's a guide that provides the industry standards. So, as mentioned, business architecture has its own framework. Using your BIZBOK enables you to use that industry standard. Now, for those who've worked in business analysis, you'll know that you've got the BIZBOK, and those who've worked in project management, you've got PMBOK. So most of these areas where there's a profession that has been developed, you would have a body of knowledge associated with that to enable the standards within that practice. So anyone who's wishing to use business architecture can use the framework and address business challenges by having that knowledge base and that body of knowledge that is provided. So in summary, if you want to know more about your business architecture framework, then you would typically go into reviewing what that BIZBOK guide is. Have a read of the key learnings from this particular area of your module. Now we're going to look at the principles and benefits of business architecture. And here in this particular section, I just want to demonstrate how business architecture can solve quite a few business problems. And for those who've been working in business projects, for instance, or have been working as business analysts or have been business architects for some time, you will recognize that often we end up in the same situation and have the same project problems and change problems because we don't have this overarching bird's eye view of our business and how change could be initiated effectively. So let's consider, if we're using business architecture, what those key principles might be. Your business architecture principles. Firstly, business architecture is about the business. So everything around the business is what we look at in terms of business architecture. Secondly, business architecture scope is the scope of the business. So it doesn't stretch into IT or any of those areas. It's specifically the scope of what the business is requiring. It is not prescriptive. And that means there's some flexibility on how you apply or what you need in terms of business architecture in an organization or a business. Business architecture is iterative, so there are changes that happen, there are refinements and improvements as you go through the process. It's also reusable. And business architecture is not about the delivery. So remember, we go back to this example of building a house. When you go to an architect to design your house, it's not about how the project ran or how the team was working or where the plumbing teams were late. It is about the design of that particular home. So this is how business architecture will focus on the design of your particular business. Yeah, as a general example. So those are your key principles when thinking about business architecture. Have a read of the key learnings from this particular area of your module. Why business architecture? Now, actually, every business has business architecture. That's the foundation that makes up your organization. The key here is, do you actually have an idea of how the business architecture is working? So we're looking at business architecture. It's around that formalization of your organization and ensuring that you've articulated what the business does in a very specific manner. And so when you're doing strategy and change, you've got those tools and that information to help you understand. So in the same way that we look at building a new house, we know we've got the house. We know that there's some form of architecture in there, but we still need to determine what is that blueprint, what does it look like, so that we can make the right decisions. And this is why we need business architects and we need business architecture in the formal sense within organizations. So business architecture provides a rationalized view of the organization. And rationalized in this case means something that you can see, and it's like a tangible thing so that you can see how the business is working. And therefore, plan better for your future investments, but not only for your future investments, also to ensure that the decision making, what your products are, determining what's redundant and what's been wasteful, all of those things, by having that blueprint, you can start to get that visualization of what the view of the organization, the view of the business is. It simplifies complexity and architects transformations and change initiatives. And so this is where the cross-mapping, so all of our key blueprints and cross-mapping various other frameworks like process modeling or lean or any of those ones that we can use our capabilities and value streams to cross-map to, enables an enterprise view. So it's not limited just to, let's say, a business unit, as I've mentioned before, but now you've got this view of the enterprise as a whole, which business architecture can help provide. Here is another thing to consider. So when business strategies fail, and we know that when we look at project management history and we look at what a lot of the experiences are for people who've done, let's say, digital transformation or any of the key transformational areas, we know that it may not be because the strategy is poor, but because we cannot execute it efficiently. And that comes all the way back to the initial planning, the cost analysis, the benefits, the prioritization, the initiatives. Again, if we look at the idea of building a house, it's not necessarily that the building of the house or the rebuild of the house would be a failure because of us basically having a bad strategy. It would be more because we didn't realize all the complexities, or we didn't have something to work off, or we didn't understand what we could or couldn't drop in our projects. So business architecture not only provides the information strategic leaders need, but also defines the context for turning strategy into viable operational results. So again, great benefits of why we have business architecture, or why we should bring business architecture into our organizations. So how does business architecture enable business? And quite simply, business architecture, as I've said before, is this bridge from our strategy through to our operational side. And the reason for that is because business architecture is stakeholder value driven. So in other words, what our business wants is really what we are looking at delivering. It's capability centric. It's strategically orientated, where you know that comes from the strategy side of things. It's silo agnostic. So in other words, business architecture doesn't only do one business unit and look at how that business architecture works. It works across the organization. It works both external and internally to provide transparency. And that means we're not only looking at how our business is performing, but we'd look at partners, we'd look at multiple different areas, and we'd look outside of our organization to look at, let's say, what our competitors are doing. It also enables business model realization, which fundamentally means that whatever business model we're choosing, your business architecture is typically agnostic to what that is. So all of this enables the operations of our business, because now we know what decisions we're making. And as we talk about creating this blueprint, which would help improve the operational perspective, which is how you're going to do it. So business architecture is giving you what you're going to do in order to improve your operations. Have a read of the key learnings from this particular area of your module. Now we'll look at business blueprints and frameworks. And the term blueprints typically has come from having those architectural designs for houses and buildings and even mechanical designs. And we use them in business architecture too. So typically they're a complete plan that explains how to do or to develop something. And typically they're done in a visual perspective. The first thing that we need to do is we need to capture all of these different business architecture artifacts into a storage space. So now you've got the capabilities, the value streams, the organization and information mapping, and you've got the various other components, and you want to store these somewhere so that they all fit into the knowledge base. And once you have that, you can then create business blueprints, and these business blueprints can now be used with all of that information and insight that you have from your knowledge base to work within your business and your context. So when BIZBOK and with business architecture we say that it's not prescriptive, basically what we mean is that the way that you do capabilities and the way that you do value streams and the way that you draw them is prescriptive, because there's a rule around how you draw it, like you would with BPMN, there's a rule around how you draw it. But how you use it, same with BPMN or any other framework that you use, how you use it is contextual, and you can choose how these might work for your organization, and therefore your blueprint will be appropriate to the organization that you're working with. So by having all of these components together in your knowledge base, and they are consistent and aligned, you can now create these blueprints for your organization. So as mentioned, once you've got your organization's business architecture documented, so you've now got this knowledge base, then the blueprints and the reports can be generated. And this is used to support a wide variety of business scenarios. So as I said, you can say, all right, we're going to be doing digital transformation, or we're going to be doing, let's say, customer-centric business model, or we're going to look at outsourcing. And so that's where we'll create a particular business scenario and business blueprint, bringing all of those architectural components together. Because remember, each business is unique and each change request is unique as well. So this is how, by having a standardized kind of business architecture framework or knowledge base, you can now use that in order to develop these business blueprints and scenarios. Here is a more visual representation. So you've got all of those different components of your business architecture. You've now put them into a knowledge base, and now you can develop business architecture blueprints and business architecture scenarios using that knowledge base to help you understand better what your organization might need. Just to expand on that blueprint concept, so there are many graphical representations you can do. So if you're doing initiative mapping, you can choose what kind of visualization you want out of that. And so it becomes a graphical representation of one or more aspects of an extended enterprise view, which may extend beyond organizational boundaries. So what that means is, when you do a blueprinting, you don't have to only design your business. You could include, let's say, stakeholder mapping with partners. You could show how your organization has vendors that work with you, or how you have shared capabilities. So in order for you to create blueprints, there's no real boundary in there and how you do it, as long as you've got your knowledge base that you're using to work out what those blueprints might look like from an architectural point of view, of course. So there are many design options that we do talk about as we go through business architecture training, but it really does allow you to look at many ways in which to understand your organization better. So just to wrap up all of that now, we know that our business architecture framework consists of our knowledge base, which sits in the middle, and that is then utilized to create business blueprints and business scenarios, and the two kind of work hand in hand. Your business architectural framework encompasses all of this. It's a conceptual view of how business blueprints, business scenarios, and your business architecture knowledge base interrelate to provide a foundation for establishing your business architecture. Have a read of the key learnings from this particular area of your module. So who is a business architect? And really we need to understand that because the role is relatively new, not everybody has the job title, but that is changing quite significantly. So really it is about making sure that the person who can practice in business architecture is fundamentally a business architect. And we'll go through a little bit more detail now around what those key functions are, what is the goal, and what are the areas that they look at. Because business architecture is relatively new in terms of industry standards, you don't always play the role of business architect, as I've mentioned, but you do look at performing the functions of business architecture. So here are some things we look at: developing the business architecture knowledge base, blueprints and scenarios, as we've discussed. We'd also have related architectural solutions. So we work with enterprise architects, we work with application, solution, data architecture. So there's quite a lot of related architectural solutions that we will align to those business objectives and business outcomes. And then developing business transformation plans jointly with senior management. So we are helping the organization see the picture. So just as you would if you were designing a house, you would work with your client to help envisage what that might be. And then developing and maintaining architectural governance and controls over implementation, which is a typical thing we do for most of our frameworks or most of our professions. We have some form of governance. So recently I've been speaking to a gentleman who is really interested in business architecture, but for small businesses. And I thought it was quite interesting because there is a perception in the field that it really is for big companies, and certainly it does help when it comes to big companies because there's so many silos that companies work in. Having business architecture to bring that full picture in will certainly help organizations. But let's look at what you as a business architect could do for a startup company. So when a business is a startup or trying to reinvent itself, a business architect can help develop the company policies and goals. So we'll look at those strategies, we'll look at what do we want to achieve, and that could really help with saying what is our core business, what are our capabilities, what are the constraints that we have, and then overall our strategy. So where do we want to be? And by establishing efficient business practices and solidifying the relationship between the departments and the roles, they are a key component. So business architects are a key part of ensuring new products and services offered by the company are in alignment with the strategic business plan. Not only are you helping these small companies and startups to come up with a strategy that makes sense. So in other words, it's based on what they do and what they need to do, but you're also helping them deliver on that based on that understanding of those blueprints across their products and services and what they're trying to deliver. So I actually think business architects can help any level, and I suppose it goes down to the same principle. If you were building a house or you were building a massive 10-story building, you still need to architect it. And so I imagine for business architects it's the same thing. It doesn't matter the size of the organization, but the tools and the design that we use helps a business be successful. So your role could be at several levels, and it depends really on how your business is structured. So at a macro level, and that's really overarching how the organization is looking, you establish principles and governing policies over the interactions with suppliers, partners, and all types of outsourcing. So you are looking at all of these components in and beyond the organization, just at that level of the macro level. At the strategic level, you are looking at supporting the vision, the target capabilities, the principles of policies, the current state environment, and you're providing some context to the organization. So you're working with your executive teams or those who are running programs, or there's a big change in the organization, to ensure that at the strategic level you're getting that information. Now, this is not always usual, but it does depend on the type of role that you've been given in terms of where you've been placed. And remember that business architects also work in enterprise architecture. So although we promote the practice of business architecture as a standalone practice that works with enterprise architecture, in some organizations it's used as a subset of enterprise architecture. However, it is important to understand how the practice of business architecture still works. So at the program level, this is where you look at strategic initiatives into delivery-focused change initiatives. So you're looking at what the business wants, and then you're going, okay, these are the initiatives we should have in place for the changes moving forward. And the term initiatives in a business architectural term is cross-mapping all of the views in the business. So it's not just here's one project and we manage it in isolation. It's looking at an initiative and what is the impact of that initiative on other initiatives, for instance. And then at your lowest level, so business architecture, although you're practicing as a business architect, you would potentially have a different role, because here you'd be looking at product owner or business analyst, and these roles engage with a project with a main purpose of communicating your architecture and promoting your project alignment with it. So the role is not so much around developing architecture, but it's around communicating your business architecture. And typically, this is where your business analysts and your business product owners and similar type roles would work with the business architecture. So they actually not creating the business architecture necessarily, but they asking the right questions to make sure that business architecture is brought into that project space so that it can be done at a strategic level. And this is often where I say you might be actually asking the questions why anyway. So you might go, why are we doing it this way? And this is where business architecture, by having those diagrams and those blueprints around the strategy and the structure and the capabilities of the organization, you're now providing a better perspective or a more balanced perspective of how the organization might look. So in simple terms, if you're building a house and you're going through the project, you want people to give you advice on what that blueprint is. And often what happens in our big IT projects or in our change projects, we end up focusing on what the project is. So we focus on the build and we don't focus on the design that's going to govern the build. So this is where there's a natural tendency for many business product owners and business analysts to move into the scope, the higher levels of business architecture, so that they can actually start designing that architecture to then use and align with your projects. Have a read of the key learnings from this particular area of your module. So just as a light overview, when you're looking at certification as a business architect, and as we were mentioning the different roles, now you don't need to have the job title to be a business architect and practice as business architect, but it is good to have the badge of a business architect. And this is where your BIZBOK is the body of knowledge that you would use to get certified as a business architect. So what is this certification and just generally how it works? And we'll have a quick talk through that. And for those who are interested in the formal study, this would be the route to go. In other words, getting certified as a business architect, regardless of your role. And for those who are just interested in the role, you just want to explore some of the ideas, then you don't need to go into that formal level of business architecture, but you can start understanding how that could help support your role a little bit better. To become a certified business architect, you need to be a member of the Business Architecture Guild. And this is because they're the certification body. So they own the BIZBOK and they manage the certification as a certified business architect. So the process is, once you become a member, you will be able to then apply for your exam. So my advice is give yourself 3 to 6 months to start your preparation, and when you feel that you have an idea of when you want to write your exam, do a kind of a pre-booking. I do believe that you can change that at any time. It helps if you have to do any trips or anything along those lines, but this will give you a schedule that you need to go through to understand what are all the steps you have to take and what are all the modules you need to go through, and how often you're going to do your exam drills. So that's just some tips. Obviously everyone learns at their own pace in their own way, but this is what my suggestion is, that you plan it up front, because there are days where it can be really tough and there are other days where it seems like a breeze and you've got it all covered. So to avoid making any assumptions, schedule all of it and you'll be on your way and going forward. It's really important to be recognized for the hard work, and at the end of this program we do offer a certificate from Agora. So as Guild accredited training partners, all of our modules have been reviewed and go through the Business Architecture Guild. And as you go through these different modules and you've completed and met the requirements of completion, and you'll see that because we create prerequisites as you go through, the system starts calculating and sees once you've completed the program, and then you'd be issued a certificate which does give you a unique ID, which is something that you can share, and it does have the Guild badge with it. To become a certified business architect, you need to go through the Guild, as we've discussed, because they're the ones who manage that exam. So the exam is quite different from the training, but the exam is there to give you the certified business architecture badge. And the benefit of going through all of that is obviously that you can get recognized for the skills, knowledge that you have in the field of business architecture. And that for anybody is a great badge to have, I would say. A key success factor for you is going to be to understand your learning style. And we all learn in different ways. So some of us are really visual and we want to see all the pictures and we want to be able to put that all together. And that's the majority of us actually. And some of us want to hear, and some of us want to be able to do practice tests. So we really have looked to cater for all of these components as best we can in an online platform. And so it's really important as you go through your planning, your schedule of how you're going to go through the exam, that you understand what your learning style is and how you want to study. So we do provide you multiple avenues for you to actually learn and get acquainted with the program. But it also is on you to understand how you best learn and where to focus your energy so that you are getting the best outcome or the best bang for buck for you. Your learning process. So this is quite important, and I do hope that you just trust us in this process. And obviously you have your own styles too, as we discussed previously. So the first thing is you need to download your study guide and you need to read the module that you're looking at. So if you're looking at capabilities, then just go through capabilities and read capabilities. You don't have to try read everything at once. We're going to pace this and it's going to be simple steps going through everything. Then you're going to watch the presentation like you have now on that particular module, and you will also see the amount of time that you need for each of those. Then you'd go to the library to clarify any understanding that you need. And remember, your library has each module broken down. So if you want to know more about module 1 capabilities, then go to your library and you'll see that there's some more documents and videos and explainers there. So it's not directly related to BIZBOK necessarily, but it helps you understand some concepts a bit better. It's not a requirement, but that's if you haven't quite got it. And then complete your quiz question. So you want to test your understanding. How well do you know this particular module that you've just gone through? And then join the discussion. So you'll notice in every module there is an opportunity to ask questions. And I advise you, instead of asking me personally some questions, anything related to your modules, ask it in the discussion boards, and everybody gets the benefit of understanding that session and that module a little bit better. I don't want just general questions coming to me around the course. Let's direct it in the place where it needs to go so that everybody gets the benefits of those FAQs. And then review your scoring. So how much did you score in those tests? Do you need to do another test? Do you need to try it again? And update your schedule. So you'll see the schedule in the next section as we go through how would you schedule all of this, but you need to decide if you need to do some quiz questions or maybe review 1 or 2 areas in each module. People do learn differently, so I'm not suggesting that you have to get 100% first time round. I'm just suggesting that you record your scores so that you know if you need to go back sooner than later, just to clarify your thinking. And that is your learning process. So you have completed module 0, and that's a great achievement because you'll notice as you go through all of these modules, you'll slowly start building that knowledge base. And even if you know that information before, it's going to help clarify how you would sit the